Is it worth it? Well, should you get your sport pilot's license? I'm sure that's a question that many people have asked at some point or another when they've investigated getting into flight training. There's so many different options. Even when you start looking into a private pilot's license, then in addition to that, then after that, you can add in your instrument rating, your multi rating, your high performance, your commercial, your ATP, your CFI. There's so many aspects to pilot's licenses, but the light sport or the sport pilot category is something that's fairly new in the world of aviation, and it was developed as an option to help people to be able to get into aviation that might not normally be able to do so. One reason would be somebody who has either lost or is unable to get a third-class medical. Another reason is that sport pilot licenses, light sport airplanes, were intended to be significantly cheaper to operate, less time in instruction, therefore it's going to mean less cost overall. At different points in time, I have investigated the LSA option as well, the sport pilot option, for the only reason being the financial aspect of flight training. But is it worth it? Well, when this was first presented as an option a number of years ago, it seemed like a really cool thing. Yeah, okay, there's going to be some limitations, but perhaps the benefits are going to far outweigh the limitations imposed by this particular type of license. So I guess the first thing would be to say, what are some of these limitations? Well, for one, just comparing it side by side to a private pilot's license, because the private pilot's license is the basic of what most people get into when they get into airplanes, or when they get into aviation in general. So you're limited on the amount of weight for the airplane. You're limited on the amount of power for the airplane. You can only have one passenger. You can only fly during the day in VFR conditions. You cannot fly at night. You can't fly above 10,000 feet MSL or 2,000 feet AGL. MSL being mean sea level, AGL being above ground level. You can't fly in certain types of airspace. You can't fly outside of the United States unless you have specific authorization to do so. The types of airplanes that you're limited to are light sport airplanes, which means they have to be under 1,320 pounds. They can't have a maximum speed of more than 120 knots. Those are just some of the limitations in addition to the limitations that would be imposed upon a standard private pilot's license as well. Now, of course, within those limitations for the airplane, some certified aircraft do fall into that category as being considered a light sport airplane. A J3 Cub, for instance, would be considered light sport. The Luscombe 8 series, the Taylorcraft BC series, the Aeronca Champ, the Aircoupe 415 series. These are some certified aircraft that would also by default be considered to be light sport. And then in addition to that, there's an entire world of LSAs that have been specifically designed as such, some of which are certified, some of which are experimental. The Cessna Skycatcher, for instance, was a certified aircraft specifically designed to be an LSA, specifically designed for flight schools, in fact, to help to teach in a light sport aircraft. But see, that brings up one of the interesting points about this as well, which is that to do any of this training, it has to be done in a light sport airplane. You cannot do your sport pilot training in a Piper Warrior, for instance. Now, there has been some discussion in recent years about expanding this certification to allow an increase in weight and power to certain other types of airplanes. For instance, the Cessna 150 and 152 or the Piper Warrior. These are some airplanes that would potentially be included in this if this was to change. But one of the reasons why this was supposed to why this was going to be so beneficial was going to be because of the diminished cost. But did that really happen either? You look at some of the costs of these airplanes. To purchase a new LSA is typically over $100,000. So if you're looking to get into this to save money, purchasing a $100,000 plus airplane is not something that's going to be saving you money, especially when you could purchase a Piper Warrior for $25,000. Now, some of these existing airplanes, the J3 Cub, for instance, or the Luscombe or the Champ, these are airplanes that you can get for a more affordable price. Of course, there are not as many of them. And good luck finding a flight school that is going to teach in these airplanes. That's one of the things that was an issue in the area that I'm from. We have a ton of flight opportunities. We have flight schools all over the place. We've got airports all over the place. And yet, it's impossible to find somebody who's able to teach you in a light sport airplane. There was a while where one of the flight schools in town had the Cessna Skycatcher. They had one Cessna Skycatcher for this, which they eventually sold because there wasn't enough interest in it. But they were charging $150 an hour for the Skycatcher and almost $80 an hour for CFI time. Now you're talking $240 an hour for LSA time. Meanwhile, at the exact same period of time, I was learning in the Cessna 150, and with the amount that I was paying for my CFI and for my flight lessons, I was paying $150 an hour for a full-fledged certified airplane for a private pilot's license. Now, again, in this situation, I was able to pass a medical. I was able to carry a medical, so I didn't need the light sport certification, so there was no reason for me to do so other than a cost savings. But since there was no cost savings, what was the point in doing that? Now, I will say, if it's a matter of not being able to fly because of an issue with a medical, this is an awesome opportunity. This is an opportunity to be able to get into aviation while you would have otherwise been cut off from it. But in my opinion, unless that's the reason you're doing it, there's no reason at all to go after the sport pilot's license. Now, you can fly an LSA airplane, a light sport aircraft, with a private pilot's license or even greater. In fact, the airplane you fly may be an LSA and it may be IFR certified. So you could be flying in IFR conditions with a commercial pilot's license in a light sport airplane. There's nothing to limit you on that. It's just the license itself that limits you from being able to fly in anything greater than the limitations on that license. So part of the reason that it's supposed to save so much money is because the training is so much less. Instead of the minimum 40 hours for a private pilot's license, you're looking at a minimum 20 hours for your light sport. And all of the things that you go into are going to be cut in half or diminished significantly. Also, there are aspects that you're not going to learn, like flying at night, those kind of things. But then when you combine that with the existing costs of the aircraft usage or the inability to find adequate training for these situations, is it really saving you anything at all? Now, again, if you're doing this because of a purely medical reasoning, and this is the best that you're going to be able to get, absolutely do it. This is going to be an awesome opportunity. But if you're looking into this as a potential stair step, okay, I can't afford to do the full private pilot's license now, so I'll just go ahead and do a sport pilot's license, and then I'll just add on to that. That's maybe a viable option. Sport pilot is better than nothing, but if you're eventually planning to move on to that, it just doesn't make any sense because you're going to miss out on so much training opportunities. You're going to have to go through all of that again when you decide to go further to get your private pilot's license. Which incidentally brings up some issues for me anyway, which is that I don't see the difference between operating an LSA and operating something like a Cessna 150, which is just barely a little bit outside of those weight restrictions. Why would you be able to operate one without a medical certificate and one you have these strict requirements for your medical certificate? Meanwhile, you're going out here without a medical certificate with half the training. It just doesn't make any sense to me. If anything, what needs to happen is there needs to be a combination in between where the LSA requirements are higher and the private pilot requirements are more lenient, allowing different types of medications. These medications have been around for a long time, and that's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother video. But there are avenues for wiggle room there that I think should be explored. I think there are avenues for cost saving that need to be explored to get more people into aviation. We're always hearing about how general aviation is dying, and we need more young people in aviation. We need more this, we need more that, because we have to get people into this. Well, the number one reason why people aren't flying is because it's so expensive. You're looking at $13,000, $15,000 to get your private pilot's license, and then minimum $150 to $200 an hour flying time after that once you get your license, depending on the type of airplane, unless you want to purchase your airplane, which is a whole other can of worms in that. How are most people able to get into that type of thing just for general aviation purposes? Most people cannot justify that type of a hobby. There needs to be avenues and opportunities that can lower the cost of flight training so that more people can have an opportunity. If more people are going to be involved in general aviation, something needs to change in that regard. I'm actually going to put a stop to this right now because I realized when I watched where this progressed after this that I end up just kind of going on a really long tangent, and it kind of went off a little bit. But then I thought, you know what, this is a point for a whole other video. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another video where I'm going to talk about these other aspects of things, the issues that I see with flight training as it currently stands, and some ideas, just these are just some of my opinions on some ideas of things that can be done, can be explored, could be talked about as options, as a jumping off point for more discussions for how we can make flight training more attainable, more achievable for more people. So stick around for the next video and we'll talk about that.